Hello, good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Late afternoon. Jim Bermudez, Development Services Director with the City of Suisun City. Fairly new, about 3 months in, and it did take me a while to say City of Suisun City. It just seemed awkward rolling off my lips, but hey, I'm getting used to it and comfortable with it. I wanted to welcome you tonight, this evening, to an exercise community meeting regarding the city's 30-acre property. When I got here, the city manager said, hey, can you think of a creative name to name that site? Because we always refer it to the 30-acre city property in the city. And unfortunately, we're still working on that. So it still remains the 30-acre infill site in the city. We'll get into a little bit more detail of the specificity of location and so forth. I think if you're here, you may or may not know where that is located. With that said, the city is presenting today an overview of what we could think about development on that site. Our consultant, Matthew Gherkin, who is here, I'll introduce him in a bit, will walk you through a presentation on an overview of the site. In conclusion of that presentation, there will be a little exercise out in the lobby area that we would like your input as well. And for anybody that could not make it today, we are recording this particular meeting or session here, and it will be posted on our site, and the public will be able to look at it and view it and actually complete an exercise on our website, so we get more feedback for those that we were not able to take this afternoon. Part of the exercise we're doing today is affiliated with state grant with Housing Community Development state, and it's what we call an SB2 grant. That grant is actually a few years old. The purpose of the grant is to accelerate housing, and mostly every city in California received funding for SB2 and to try to find various ways to accelerate funding for housing. The city came across, our tranche of money and has worked with AECOM, who Matthew works with, to help us and guide us through a process for looking at this property as well as other elements of work product that would be coming forward in the near future related to the SB2 that we received. So at this point, I'll conclude and turn it over to Matthew Gherkin, and he'll guide us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everyone. I'm Matthew Gherkin from AECOM. I am working to help the city update the Waterfront District Specific Plan. That's the document that provides guidance for development throughout the entire downtown area. But as Jim mentioned, tonight we're here to talk about one very important site within that plan area, the 30-acre property. I'll provide an overview of that site and the surrounding area. I will highlight some key factors to think about when you want to think about what uses should go there, what scale of development should go on that site. I'll talk about a couple of development concepts that will have you consider. I'll go over some next steps, and then, as Jim mentioned, we'll go out into the public gathering space over there, and we'll get your input on what should happen on this 30-acre parcel. This is an overview. You can see it on the slide here, the location. The property is vacant. It's about 30 acres in land area owned by the city currently. It's adjacent to the Suisun train depot. It's adjacent to the park and ride facility that is used for that train depot. It's adjacent to downtown, essentially, and Highway 12. This property represents a huge opportunity for the city to add vibrancy to the downtown area, to capitalize on the presence of this regional commuter rail station right next door, a major opportunity to add vibrancy downtown on a single site right next to the commercial part of the downtown area, and to make good on the existing vision and the existing downtown waterfront district specific plan, which is to foster transit-oriented development around the train station, including higher density housing and mixed-use development. This slide shows the current zoning, essentially, of the site, downtown commercial, as well as the zoning on surrounding properties, downtown mixed use, residential higher density, and then further to the south. So about those key factors that you want to think about, market factors. What uses is there a demand for? What do you learn about the project's location in terms of what uses and scale of development should be on the site? Well, I'll provide a couple of highlights along those lines. As I mentioned, the site is right next door, right next to the commuter rail station. This represents a major opportunity to help people get out of their cars, to reach jobs or other destinations without dealing with congestion, to attract new residents to the community that would bring with them additional disposable income to support our existing businesses and to generate demand for new businesses in the future. The presence of the train depot represents a very important amenity that enhances the value of the property if it's used for residential development, especially higher density residential development, and therefore leading to additional revenues that will help the city's fiscal conditions. Now, what about other uses? Retail development, for example. Right now, Sassoon City has a little bit more retail development, about 11% or so more retail development right now, today, than the local population could support. So it exports retail to some extent. So that might not be the best use just in terms of a demand point of view. What is their demand for? Also, want to avoid drawing away demand for existing businesses in the established part of the downtown area. And also we think about e-commerce, and you'll never believe this, but e-commerce in the year 2000 represented about 1% of overall activity. In 2020, about 12 to 15%. That's a huge disruption in how retail development occurs on the landscape. What about other uses? Office development. The vacancy rate for office in the Napa Solano region is about 17.5%. That's a huge number. There's major disruption, obviously, in the office market related to remote work, related to the pandemic. So that might also not be the best fit. And the other use I thought to mention, industrial, too low a value for a use, not appropriate considering the location of this. So what should we think about for this site? It probably, if you look at market demand, if you look at location, if you consider land use, transportation, the other factors that I sort of got in economics, fiscal conditions, probably the best fit would be a primarily residential development, but perhaps with some other complementary uses. Relatively high in density to take best advantage of this opportunity to add vibrancy downtown to support existing and future businesses in the core, the downtown commercial core. And another point to consider, in addition to market demand, economics, so land use, location, transportation, is that rents have been rising rapidly in the last few years. Vacancy rates on the multifamily side are extremely low, so that additionally suggests demand for higher density housing development in the city, and this site would be a particularly good opportunity in that respect. We'd also recommend thinking about improving bicycle pedestrian connectivity in this area so that people from throughout this portion of the city can reach the depot, and future residents of the site can reach the depot in a safe and convenient way. This little diagram on the right side of this slide shows pedestrian bicycle connections sort of through the site. It's just conceptual. The locations, the particular locations of these facilities is not as important as the concept of just provide through connectivity, bike and ped, through the connectivity, safe, convenient, where people feel comfortable walking and biking through this site to reach other nearby locations. we have put together a couple of viable development concepts for your consideration. We've looked at their conceptual drawings, but they have attached to them building square footage, units matched to parking, open space. The retail square footages are on a development table. We wanted to put together a couple of concepts that were realistic in terms of their potential and their viability. The first is concept one, as you see on this slide, which is relatively lower scale, lower density, but still transit-oriented development with complementary retail, commercial uses. We show 2 to 3 story residential buildings with surface parking and complementary open space interspersed within the development. We also show in blue in the center, perhaps a community building, a small community building that could be used for common purposes for future residents of the site. And we also show low scale, perhaps 1-story retail opportunities along the highway and along Marina Boulevard in this concept. That is, and this slide shows some precedent images, perhaps what could concept one look like. Perhaps it could look something like relatively lower scale oriented residential development. We also have concept 2. So we think of this as medium scale transit-oriented development, primarily residential, but with complementary uses. This concept shows 3 to 4 story residential buildings instead of surface parking, interior structured parking, sometimes called wrap construction, where the parking is actually in the middle of the building and the residential part of the buildings are on the surrounding fringes of each building. Again, here there's complementary open space interspersed within the site. You see Railroad Avenue connecting through the northwestern portion of the site. You see, again, a community building with a different orientation toward the center of the site, and you see some retail opportunities along the highway and, again, along Marina Boulevard. Some images for inspiration to show what this concept might look like in real life. So tonight we are seeking your input. As Jim mentioned, this is also being recorded to be posted in the various ways the city puts out information, with the same survey exercise provided for those who want to follow along online. We want to know, do you like either of these concepts that we've come up with? What uses do you think would most benefit the community on this site? What size or scale of development would be appropriate? And what community needs or amenities ought to be prioritized here? We're going to use this input along with our analysis to inform a revision to that waterfront district specific plan that I mentioned at the outset. To conduct an environmental review of that and then prepare a revised specific plan for adoption. And I think Jim had a couple other notes on next steps.
So Matthew highlighted the next steps. I would say from an administrative perspective of how we will be moving forward, but a non-administrative and technical side is more of where we're at with the property and the disposition of the property, meaning the sale of the property. I'm sure people want to know that. And currently the city owns the property. Like any sale of property, the city will have to go out for a proposal from anybody interested in the property to secure it. And based on the proposals that we received during a period to be determined yet, there'll be a selected development group that would come forward that would be likely the superior option for that property. We're ways away from that. I would say a few months away from actually a solicitation, but that is likely to be the process. From receipt of those proposals, we are going to be looking for a varying diverse type of project area, as Matthew described here. So we'll take a little bit of, it may not be exactly like concept 1 or concept 2, but it's going to have to be I think a meeting in the middle of what exactly is ripe and makes sense for the community, the city, factoring all tangibles such as impacts to water, impacts to traffic, and impacts to the city as well. So that's all to be determined. Be on the lookout for those type of discussions occurring as you follow the project and as it moves forward. But at this point, we're clearly in a position to get started on some of these next steps here that Matthew pointed out. So with that, I'll conclude what I have to say tonight. I can talk to you, out there as I conclude. But if you want to turn it over to Matthew and wrap it up.
So you saw the 5 or so questions that we had on the previous slide. And we have put together a little survey to allow you to offer your opinion on exactly those topics. There are a couple ways to do that. You can use the QR code that is on this slide. It will put an electronic survey right on your phone. You can take it that way. You could also type in this URL that you see on the slide and take an electronic survey using your computer. And for those of you gathered here tonight, I also have the old school version, just a piece of paper where we can gather your opinions that way. And so like Jim mentioned, we're going to move to the little public gathering space where we have posted big printouts of the development concepts, and I look forward to hearing what you all think. Thank you so much.